The day my younger brother stood up at my engagement dinner, lifted his champagne glass, and said, "Before we celebrate, shouldn't everyone know she's marrying a man whose company she plans to steal," was the moment I understood that my family had never intended for me to win anything. Not love, not respect, and certainly not happiness. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 31 years old, recently promoted to senior operations manager at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Ohio, and engaged to a man I believed loved me for who I was, not for what I could give him. That night was supposed to be simple. A small dinner, my parents, my brother Evan, my fiancé Mark. No speeches, no drama. That was my first mistake. If you grew up like I did, you learn early that hope is dangerous. I was the reliable daughter, the quiet one, the one who cleaned up after everyone else's messes and accepted maybe next year as an answer to everything. Evan, 2 years younger, was the miracle son, athletic, charismatic, always one bad decision away from disaster and always rescued before he hit the ground. My parents used to say they treated us equally. What they meant was that Evan was loved loudly and I was tolerated silently. I had learned to live with that. What I had not learned was how far they were willing to go to keep me in my place. The restaurant was warm and dimly lit, the kind of place chosen for anniversaries and quiet celebrations. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, oblivious to the tension already coiled in my chest. My mother kept adjusting her napkin. My father stared at his plate like it might confess something. Evan smiled too easily, the way he always did right before things went wrong. When he stood up, my first thought was that he was about to make a tasteless joke. He always did. I did not expect the words that followed. I remember the clink of glass, the way conversations at nearby tables faded into background noise, the sharp intake of breath from my mother, the way Mark's hand tightened, confused, protective. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice steady in a way I did not feel. Evan tilted his head, enjoying himself. "I'm just saying maybe Mark should know who he's marrying. Claire's not exactly honest when there's money involved." I laughed. I actually laughed, because it was absurd, until my father cleared his throat and said nothing. Until my mother whispered Evan stop, not with anger but with fear. That was when the room shifted. Evan continued, words spilling now practiced. "She's been positioning herself at work, getting close to the owners, learning things she shouldn't. You don't think it's a coincidence she suddenly got that promotion, or that she's marrying a man in finance?" Mark turned to me, confusion creasing his face. "Claire," I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked Evan one simple question. "Why are you doing this?" His smile widened, because it's time the truth came out. The rest of the dinner dissolved into fragments. My mother crying in the bathroom. My father insisting this was all a misunderstanding. Evan refusing to apologize. Mark driving me home in silence, his trust shaken by doubts I could not yet name. That night, after Mark fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my life that suddenly felt recontextualized. The forgotten birthdays, the missed graduations, the way my parents always warned me not to get too ambitious. And something else, something that had never quite fit. The next morning, I received an email from my company's internal audit department. A routine request, it said, "Cooperation required." My stomach dropped. Within 3 days, I was placed on administrative leave pending investigation into alleged misconduct, unauthorized access, conflict of interest, manipulation of internal processes. Every accusation mirrored Evan's speech almost word for word. That was when I realized this was not a drunken outburst or sibling jealousy. This was coordinated. I called my parents. My mother didn't answer. My father did, and his voice sounded tired, resigned. "Maybe this is for the best," he said. "You've always pushed too hard." That sentence landed harder than any insult Evan had thrown. Mark tried to be supportive, but I could feel the distance growing. Doubt is quiet, but it spreads fast. His mother called him. His brother asked questions. People always do when someone whispers scandal. Within 2 weeks, my engagement was on pause. My promotion was frozen. My reputation, carefully built over a decade, was under threat. And Evan was suddenly everywhere. Posting motivational quotes online. Talking about integrity. Hinting at career opportunities opening up now that certain people were being investigated. I sat alone in my apartment one evening, surrounded by unopened mail and unanswered messages, and something inside me finally snapped. Not into anger, into clarity. I opened a notebook and wrote down everything I knew. Every conversation, every glance, every moment that had felt wrong but I had ignored because peace was easier than truth. Patterns emerged quickly. Evan had started talking to my company's compliance officer months ago. My father had introduced him. My mother had asked questions about my work she had never shown interest in before. Mark had been encouraged to be careful by people who claimed they were protecting him. They were not reacting to a scandal. They were creating one. And I understood then what my role had always been. I was the placeholder, the buffer, the one who absorbed damage so others could stay comfortable. They never expected me to fight back. That night I made 3 decisions. First, I hired my own lawyer, not a family friend, not someone recommended, someone whose entire practice revolved around corporate retaliation and whistleblower defense. Second, I requested a full copy of the internal allegations against me. And third, I stopped trying to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. If my family wanted a villain, I would not beg to be seen as innocent. I would make sure the truth destroyed the right people instead. Because what they did not know yet was this. The files Evan accused me of accessing, I had copies. The unauthorized data. It showed something far worse than anything they accused me of. And if they thought this was the beginning of my downfall, they had badly miscalculated. They had not buried me. They had handed me the map to burn everything down. And in the next chapter, I would learn exactly how deep the betrayal went, and why my brother was so desperate to ruin me before I could speak. By the time my lawyer returned my call the next morning, I had not slept. I sat at my kitchen table watching the sky lighten coffee, untouched, my phone face down, like it might bite me if I looked at it again. Her name was Dana Brooks, mid-40s, sharp voice, no small talk. "Claire," she said, "I've reviewed the email you forwarded. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a setup." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Hearing it said out loud mattered more than I expected. Dana explained the process calmly. Internal investigations moved slowly unless someone pushed them. Someone with influence. Someone with a narrative already prepared. Evan's narrative. "You're being accused of motive," she said. "That's the tell. Real compliance cases focus on actions. This focuses on character." Character. I almost laughed. For 31 years, my character had been the family's favorite punching bag. Dana told me to request the full complaint file formally. I hung up and did exactly that, copying legal counsel on every message. Within hours, the tone shifted. Polite, careful, defensive. That was my second clue that Evan had overplayed his hand. The file arrived that afternoon. Hundreds of pages, screenshots, meeting notes, email chains taken wildly out of context, and a sworn statement from one person, my brother. I read his words slowly. Claims that I had hinted at taking advantage of internal restructuring, that I had spoken about positioning myself financially through marriage, that I had complained about being excluded and owed more. Each sentence was crafted to sound like concern, like whistleblowing, like integrity. But Evan had never been subtle, and he had made one critical mistake. He had cited dates. Dates when I had been out of state. Dates when I was with Mark. Dates when I was not even employed in the department he claimed I accessed. He had assumed no one would check. That evening, Mark came over to talk. He stood awkwardly in my living room, hands in his pockets like a guest instead of a partner. "I don't know what to think," he said. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. "I know," I replied, "but I need to know something. Who told you I was capable of this?" He hesitated. "That was answer enough." "My mother," he said finally. "She spoke to your mom. She said she was worried." Of course she had. After he left, I cried for exactly 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, opened my laptop, and started building a timeline. If Evan wanted to paint me as manipulative, I would show exactly who had been pulling strings. I requested phone records, calendar logs, travel receipts. Dana helped me file a formal rebuttal outlining factual inconsistencies. We attached proof, hard proof, not emotion. 2 days later, the internal investigator requested a meeting. The same day my father called. "We need to talk," he said. I agreed against my better judgment. They asked me to come to the house. The one I grew up in. The one where I learned silence was survival. When I arrived, Evan's car was already in the driveway. I almost turned around. Inside, my mother sat rigid on the couch. My father stood by the window. Evan leaned casually against the counter, arms crossed like he was waiting for applause. "This has gone too far," I said before anyone else could speak. Evan smirked. "You're the one under investigation." I looked at my parents. "Did you know?" My mother's eyes filled instantly. "We just want what's best for everyone." That phrase, always that phrase. For Evan, I corrected. My father finally spoke. "You've always been intense, Claire. Driven. Sometimes that can look like ambition without boundaries." I stared at him. "You raised me to work twice as hard for half the recognition." Evan laughed. "There it is, the resentment." I turned to him fully then. "Tell me the truth. Why now? For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, not guilt, calculation. You were getting too close, he said. My stomach tightened. To what? To things that don't concern you. That was all I needed to hear. I left without saying goodbye. The next week was a blur. The investigation continued, but the tone had shifted again. Less accusatory, more cautious. Dana told me the company was realizing they had a problem and it wasn't me. Meanwhile, Evan's confidence grew louder online. He announced a new consulting venture, shared articles about ethical leadership, spoke at a local business panel about transparency. It would have been impressive if it wasn't so obviously rehearsed. Then Dana called me late one evening. I need you to sit down, she said. I was already sitting. We subpoenaed limited internal communications as part of your defense. Your brother didn't just report you. He's been advising your company. That didn't make sense. Evan had never worked there. He positioned himself as a risk mitigation consultant. Dana continued, unpaid, temporary, but it gave him access. Access to documents, to narratives, to opportunities. And there's more, she said. There's a restructuring proposal circulating, senior leadership changes, divestments. Someone is preparing to step in. My mouth went dry. He's not trying to ruin you, Dana said quietly. He's trying to replace you. Everything clicked. The engagement dinner, the timing, the sudden moral crusade. This wasn't about revenge. It was about inheritance. My parents had always hinted that the family would benefit if one of us rose high enough. Evan had tried, failed, bounced from idea to idea, always supported, always rescued. I had done it quietly, without help, without permission. And now I was in his way. That night I opened my notebook again and wrote one word at the top of the page. Revenge. Not the loud kind, not the kind that burns hot and fast, the patient kind. The kind that waits for people to expose themselves. Because Evan had underestimated one thing. I was not emotional. I was precise. And in the next chapter, I would uncover the secret agreement that tied my family, my company, and my brother's sudden ambition together in a way none of them expected. The trap was already set. They just didn't know who it was really meant for yet. The first real crack in Evan's story came from someone I had never expected to hear from again. Margaret Sloan. She had been my supervisor during my first year at the company back when I was still learning how to speak without apologizing for existing. She retired 6 years ago, moved to Arizona, and vanished from my professional life. I hadn't thought of her in years. She left a voicemail on my phone at 7:20 in the morning. Claire, it's Margaret. I'm not sure if you remember me, but I need to talk to you about your brother and about something I should have said a long time ago. My heart started pounding before I even called her back. When she answered, her voice was steady but tense, not angry, regretful. I saw Evan on a webinar last night, she said, talking about ethics, risk mitigation, internal threats. I stayed silent. He used language I recognized, phrases from an internal document your company circulated years ago, a document that never left senior management. I closed my eyes. Margaret continued, Claire, I wrote part of that document, and I never authorized its use outside the firm. Dana had told me Evan had gained access. This was proof of how. Margaret? I asked carefully. Did anyone ever question my work while you were there? She laughed short and bitter. They questioned why you weren't promoted faster. That was when she told me the part of the story no one else ever had. During my second year, senior leadership had discussed grooming me for a director track. Quietly, strategically. They wanted to avoid internal backlash. They wanted to see how I handled pressure. My father had been invited to one of those conversations. I felt physically ill. He told them you weren't ready, Margaret said. That you lacked balance. That family came first and you might not be suited for leadership. I remembered that year clearly. The exhaustion, the self-doubt, the feeling that no matter how well I performed, something invisible held me back. That recommendation stopped everything she said. And shortly after, Evan began showing up, asking questions, networking. He had been laying groundwork for years. Margaret emailed me screenshots, webinar clips, notes she had taken in real time. This isn't just unethical, she said. It's strategic misrepresentation. And if your company realizes he's repackaging proprietary frameworks as his own expertise, they'll destroy him, I finished. Yes, she said, and they'll want to know who let him in. After we hung up, I sat there shaking, not from fear, from understanding. My parents hadn't just favored Evan emotionally. They had actively redirected opportunity away from me and toward him. I forwarded everything to Dana. Her response came fast. This changes the leverage entirely. 2 days later, the internal investigator asked to meet again, in person, with counsel present. I brought Dana. The investigator, a woman named Karen Holt, did not smile this time. Ms. Whitman, she said, new information has come to light regarding external influence on this complaint. Dana slid the packet across the table. Karen read silently, slowly, her jaw tightened. Your brother was never authorized to consult, she said finally. No, Dana replied, but he was sponsored. Karen looked up. By whom? Dana did not answer. I did. My father. The silence in that room felt heavier than any accusation. Karen closed the file. We will be expanding the investigation. That afternoon, my administrative leave was lifted. Not publicly, quietly, strategically. I returned to work the next Monday to polite smiles and careful distance. People were unsure how to treat me now. I could feel the shift, the curiosity, the recalibration. Evan called me that night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. You think you're clever, he said, but you don't see the whole picture. I saved it. That same evening, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, tired. I didn't know he was doing this, she said as soon as I opened the door. I didn't invite her in. You always know, I replied. You just choose not to look. She flinched. He needs help, she whispered. He's under so much pressure. I felt something break inside me, something final. When have I ever not been under pressure, I asked. When did you help me? She had no answer. Instead, she handed me an envelope. I was told to give you this if things went wrong, she said. That was new. Inside were copies of emails, old ones, between my father and Evan. Discussions about succession, about positioning, about controlling narratives. And one line that made my blood run cold. Claire must never be allowed to outshine him. It would destroy him. I looked up at my mother. You chose him, I said. She started to cry. I chose peace, she whispered. No, I corrected. You chose comfort. She left without another word. That night I barely slept, not from anxiety, from anticipation. Because now I knew something Evan did not. He believed this was a corporate power play. He did not realize it was becoming a legal one. Dana called me the next morning. We can file a formal complaint against your brother for professional misrepresentation, she said. But there's something else. What? Your company isn't the only one he's been advising. She sent me a list. 3 firms, all connected, all competitors, all sharing confidential overlap. Corporate espionage. My hands went cold. If we move now, Dana said, we expose everything. His reputation, your father's involvement, your family. I thought about the years of silence, the dinners, the swallowed words. I thought about the engagement dinner, the humiliation, the calculated cruelty. Do it, I said. There was a pause on the line. This will be scorched earth, she warned. I looked around my apartment, at the life I had built alone, at the peace I had earned the hard way. I've been standing in the ashes my whole life, I replied. I'm ready for something new. By the end of that week, formal complaints were filed. By the end of the month, Evan's consulting website went offline. And in the next chapter, the truth would stop being something whispered in offices and start being something read aloud in court. Because the moment Evan realized he was no longer controlling the story, he made the one mistake that guaranteed his downfall. He got desperate. Desperation has a sound. It's not loud at first. It's the subtle shift in someone's voice when confidence turns brittle, the way sentences come out too fast, the way logic starts tripping over urgency. I heard it the first time Evan called after his website disappeared. He didn't leave a voicemail this time. He texted, "We need to talk now." I stared at the message for a long moment before setting the phone face down. Dana's words echoed in my head. When someone realizes they are losing control, they escalate. They make mistakes. I went back to work the next day like nothing was wrong. That alone rattled him. People watched me carefully now, but not with suspicion, with curiosity. My badge worked again. My calendar filled up. Meetings resumed. I was no longer the woman under investigation. I was the woman who survived one, and Evan hated that more than anything. By mid-morning, compliance sent out a company-wide notice announcing an external audit of consulting relationships. Neutral language, careful phrasing. But anyone who knew how to read between the lines understood exactly what it meant. Evan was being investigated. He showed up at my office that afternoon without an appointment. Security called first. "There's a man here asking for you," the receptionist said. "He says he's family." I almost smiled. "Send him up," I said, "and please stay nearby." When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The polish was gone, the confident posture, the relaxed smile. His suit was still expensive, but it sat on him wrong now, like borrowed armor. His eyes darted to the door, the windows, the corners of the room. "Close the door," he said. I didn't move. "You don't get to give orders here," I replied calmly. "What do you want?" He scoffed. "You think you've won?" "I think you're trespassing," I said. "Choose your next words carefully." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You have no idea what you're doing. These people don't care about you. They'll use you and throw you away." I leaned back in my chair. "Interesting, that sounds familiar." His jaw tightened. "Withdraw the complaint." "No." "Claire," he snapped, "this will ruin all of us." I looked at him steadily. "You already did that." He laughed, then sharp and hollow. "You always think you're so righteous. You don't see the bigger picture." "Explain it to me," I said, slowly. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "You were never supposed to get this far," he said finally. "You were supposed to back down. You always do." There it was. The truth he never thought I would challenge. "I grew up watching you take things," I said. "My space, my opportunities, my parents' approval, and every time I stepped aside you learned that pushing worked." He opened his mouth to argue, and now I continued, "You're learning something new." He laughed again, but there was fear behind it now. "You think they won't come after you too? You think Dad won't be dragged into this?" My chest tightened, but my voice stayed steady. That was his choice. Evan leaned in. "He did this for me." "No," I said quietly. "He did it because he was afraid of you." That landed. He straightened, eyes flashing. "If this goes to court, I won't protect anyone." I pressed the button under my desk. Security appeared within seconds. "Escort him out," I said, "and if he returns, call legal." Evan stared at me stunned. As they led him away, he said one last thing. "You're making enemies." I met his gaze. "I've had them my whole life." That evening, Dana called. "He contacted opposing counsel," she said. "Threatened to expose internal documents unless we backed off." I closed my eyes. "That's blackmail." "Yes," she replied, and it was documented. The next few days unfolded like a slow avalanche. Evan's new attorney filed an emergency motion claiming retaliation. It was sloppy, emotional, full of accusations with no evidence. Dana dismantled it in a single filing. Then came the subpoenas. Emails, financial records, phone logs. The scope widened quickly, and with it the panic. My father called for the first time since the investigation expanded. "Please," he said, "let's fix this privately." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, grounding myself. "You can't fix this," I said. "You built it." He was silent. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "You just didn't mind if I was collateral damage." That night my mother sent a long message I did not answer. It was full of regret and fear and apologies that arrived decades too late. I slept better than I had in weeks. The court hearing was scheduled faster than expected. Evan's attempt at intimidation had triggered mandatory review protocols. What he thought would scare us had accelerated everything. Dana prepared me carefully. "He will try to provoke you," she said. "He will frame himself as the victim." "I know," I said. "He's always been good at that." The day of the hearing, Evan arrived early. So did the press. That surprised me. But then I saw why. Evan had leaked a partial narrative to a business blogger. A story about a sister sabotaging her brother, about ambition gone wrong, about family betrayal. It might have worked. If the facts weren't about to come out. Inside the courtroom, he avoided my eyes. His leg bounced. His lawyer whispered constantly. When the judge entered the room, settled into silence. The first hour was procedural. The second was devastating. Donna presented evidence of misrepresentation, unauthorized access, patterned behavior across multiple firms, timelines that aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. Evan's lawyer objected often, overruled. Then came the emails. My father's emails. The ones instructing Evan, the ones discouraging my advancement, the ones framing me as a risk. The judge read them silently. My father stared at the floor. Evan's confidence collapsed in real time. And then Dana introduced the final piece, a recording. Evan's voicemail, the one where he said I was never supposed to get this far. The judge looked up. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "do you deny making this statement?" Evan swallowed. "No," he said. That was the moment the case changed direction. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered a full forensic audit and referred the matter to regulatory authorities. Evan was no longer the accuser. He was the subject. As we left the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. I walked past them without stopping. Evan stood frozen on the steps, surrounded by lawyers, his future unraveling with every whispered word. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to balance. But I knew better than to call it over. Because people like Evan don't surrender quietly. And in the next chapter, he would make one last attempt to regain control. This time not through work, but through blood. The first sign Evan was shifting tactics came through my mother. She called at 6:45 in the morning, her voice already unsteady. "He's not well," she said. "Claire, he's spiraling." I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the pale light creeping through the curtains. "You should be calling his lawyer," I replied. "Or a therapist." He says you're destroying the family, she whispered. I closed my eyes. Even now, even after everything, the reflex was there. The urge to soothe, to smooth, to take responsibility for emotions that were never mine to manage. I'm not destroying anything, I said. I stopped covering for it. She began to cry then, deep and exhausted. He's talking about what Dad did, about how unfair it all was, about how you were always favored. I almost laughed. Favored. That word felt surreal in my mouth, like a language I had never spoken. Mom, I said gently, if he believes that, then he's finally lying to himself instead of about me. She begged me to come over, just to talk, just to calm him down. No, I said. That's not my role anymore. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but my chest felt lighter. Saying no was still new. It still felt dangerous. But it also felt honest. By noon, the second sign arrived. A message request on social media from a woman named Rachel Miles. We went to college together. She had dated Evan briefly during his senior year. I remembered her as quiet, thoughtful, and painfully aware of how little space she was allowed to take up. Her message was simple. I think you should know what Evan is planning. We spoke that evening. Rachel did not waste time. He contacted me last night, she said, out of the blue. Asked if I remembered things from when we were together. Conversations, complaints. My stomach tightened. What kind of things? About you, she said. About your parents. About money. Of course. He asked me to write a statement, she continued. Saying you were always bitter, that you talked about revenge, that you felt entitled. I leaned back in my chair. And did you? No, she said firmly. I told him the truth. That you were exhausted, that you felt invisible, that you worked harder than anyone I knew. I swallowed. He didn't like that, she said. He said I was misremembering, that family loyalty mattered more than facts. That sounded exactly like Evan. Rachel sent me screenshots, messages where Evan grew increasingly aggressive, increasingly manipulative. He hinted that cooperating would be rewarded, that staying silent might have consequences. Dana had warned me, when people lose institutional power, they reach for personal leverage. Blood, history, guilt. That night, Evan sent me a long email. Not threatening, not angry, confessional. He wrote about our childhood, about feeling pressured to live up to expectations, about always being compared to me even when no one said it out loud. He blamed our parents. He blamed circumstances. He blamed fear. He apologized. Almost. Then came the pivot. If you withdraw your complaints, he wrote, I'll tell the truth about Dad, about how he controlled everything, about how you were manipulated too. There it was, the offer. Mutual destruction disguised as reconciliation. I forwarded the email to Dana without responding. Her reply was immediate. Do not engage. This is coercion. The third sign arrived the next morning. A certified letter from Evan's new attorney. They were proposing mediation. Private, confidential, no admission of wrongdoing. In exchange, Evan would agree to step away quietly. The complaints would be withdrawn, the family name protected. Dana laughed when she read it. He's trying to bargain from a position that no longer exists, she said. But then her tone shifted. There's something else, she added. Your father has retained separate counsel. That did not surprise me. He's preparing for exposure, she continued, and he's afraid. I thought about my father, the man who had believed he was protecting the family by sacrificing one child's potential for another's stability. I wondered if he understood yet that stability built on suppression always collapses. The mediation was scheduled anyway, not because we intended to settle, because sometimes the most revealing things happen when people think they are still negotiating. The room was neutral. Beige walls, bottled water, a clock that ticked too loudly. Evan arrived late. He looked worse. Dark circles under his eyes, hands unsteady, his confidence had curdled into something sharp and erratic. He did not look at me at first. When he finally did, his expression softened deliberately. Claire, he said quietly, I never wanted it to be like this. Dana leaned forward. Then you should not have made false allegations. Evan ignored her. I was trying to survive, he said. You don't understand the pressure. I studied him. You don't understand what pressure looks like when no one ever rescues you, I replied. His jaw tightened. The mediator attempted to guide the conversation, but Evan kept circling back to emotion, to family, to forgiveness. I'm willing to apologize publicly, he said. I'll say I overreacted, that I misunderstood. And the evidence, Dana asked. The access logs, the recordings, the witness statements. He shrugged. People forget. I smiled then, not kindly. No, I said, they document. Evan's eyes flashed. You think you're better than us now, he snapped. You think you're some kind of hero. I leaned forward, my voice calm. No, I think I finally stopped pretending this was an accident. The meeting ended without resolution. As Evan stood to leave, he paused beside me. You know, he said quietly, If this all comes out, Mom won't survive it. I looked up at him. That was your choice, I said, not mine. That night, Dana called with news. The regulators have upgraded the inquiry, she said. Potential criminal exposure. I exhaled slowly. And Evan, I asked. He's cornered, she replied. And people like your brother only have one move left when that happens. What's that? They try to flip the narrative completely. I stared out my window at the city lights, thinking of the boy who had always landed on his feet, cushioned by excuses and protection. He's going to accuse someone else, I said. Yes, Dana replied, and this time it won't be you. In the next chapter, Evan would make his most dangerous move yet. He would turn on the one person he had always believed untouchable, our father. I found out Evan had turned on our father the same way I found out most life-altering truths in my family. Not through honesty. Through damage control. Dana called me just after lunch. Her voice was clipped all business, but there was an edge I hadn't heard before. He's cooperating, she said. I closed my office door without responding. With whom, I finally asked. Regulators, prosecutors, anyone who will listen. My chest tightened. About what? She exhaled. Everything. And I mean everything. He's claiming your father orchestrated the entire consulting scheme, that he pressured him, directed him, used him as a proxy. I sat down slowly. This was Evan's final card. If he could not be the golden son, he would be the victim. If he could not win, he would burn the house down and insist he had been trapped inside. What does that mean for me, I asked. For you, Dana said. It actually strengthens your position. It corroborates coercion. And for my father, there was a pause. He's exposed, she said carefully. Legally, reputationally, possibly criminally. I stared at the wall, memories crashing through me. My father teaching Evan to drive. My father missing my graduation ceremony because Evan had a last-minute crisis. My father's voice telling me to be patient, to understand, to not make waves. He had always believed he was managing risk. Now he was the risk. That evening he called me. His name lit up my phone like a warning. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I had earned that right. But something in me wanted to hear his voice now stripped of authority and certainty. Claire, he said, and the sound of it made my throat ache. We need to talk. I didn't answer immediately. I know what Evan is saying, he continued, rushing ahead. I never intended for it to go this far. You never intended for me to get hurt either, I replied, but intent doesn't erase impact. He was quiet. I protected him, he said finally, because I was afraid of what would happen if he failed. And what about me, I asked. He didn't have an answer. He asked if we could meet, just the two of us. Against my instincts, I agreed. We met at a quiet diner halfway between our homes, neutral ground, somewhere that didn't belong to our history. He looked older than I remembered, smaller. The man who had once filled rooms with confidence now hunched over his coffee cup like it might anchor him to something solid. I never thought Evan would do this, he said. That's not true, I replied calmly. You always knew he would do whatever it took to avoid consequences. You just thought you could control it. He flinched. I made mistakes, he said. You made choices, I corrected. He told me his version of the story. How Evan had come to him years ago, frustrated, directionless. How he had introduced him to people, opened doors, smoothed paths. I never told him to lie, he said. You taught him that the truth was flexible, I replied. He rubbed his temples. I thought if I helped him succeed, he'd stop resenting you. I laughed softly. That was never about me. He looked up sharply. He resented me because I didn't need rescuing, I continued. And you resented me because my independence made your protection of him visible. The words hung between us. I loved you both, he said. I believe you, I replied. But love without fairness becomes favoritism. Tears welled in his eyes. He reached across the table, then stopped himself. He's going to destroy everything, he whispered. I leaned back. No, he's going to reveal it. There is a difference. The fallout was swift. Evan's cooperation agreement became public within days. Headlines followed. Not dramatic, not scandalous. Methodical. Senior executive implicated in consulting misconduct. Family ties under scrutiny. Corporate governance failures exposed. My father was placed on administrative leave from the board positions he still held. Invitations dried up. Calls went unanswered. My mother stopped leaving messages. I expected to feel something, vindication, satisfaction, even grief. What I felt was distance, like watching a storm move across a landscape I no longer lived in. Dana called again with an update. They want your testimony, she said. Voluntary, to establish pattern. I agreed without hesitation. The deposition room was cold, bright, impersonal. I answered questions for hours about my career, my relationship with my family, the investigation, Evan's behavior, my father's involvement. I told the truth. Not emotionally, not vindictively. Precisely. When it was over, one of the junior attorneys lingered. "I just wanted to say," she said quietly, "I've seen cases like this before. People don't usually come out intact." I met her eyes. I didn't come out intact. I came out honest. That night, Evan sent me one final message. "You're letting them destroy him." I stared at the screen. Then I typed, "No, you are." I did not send anything else. A week later, Evan was formally charged. Not with everything, but with enough. Misrepresentation, unauthorized access, obstruction. He was offered a plea deal. He took it. My father was not charged criminally. Age, health, cooperation, all factors. But his reputation never recovered. He resigned quietly from everything. I did not see him again. What surprised me most was not the collapse. It was the silence that followed. No more calls, no more justifications, no more being asked to absorb the emotional weight of other people's choices. In that silence, something unexpected happened. I felt free, not triumphant. Free. In the next chapter, the dust will begin to settle, and I will face a question I have avoided my entire life. Who am I when I am no longer defined by what I survived? The quiet that followed the collapse was not peaceful at first. It was disorienting. For most of my life, my identity had been shaped by reaction, anticipating moods, avoiding conflict, proving worth to people who never planned to acknowledge it. When that constant pressure disappeared, I didn't immediately feel relief. I felt unmoored. The first week after Evan accepted the plea deal, I woke up every morning with the same reflexive tension in my chest, as if I were bracing for impact that never came. No angry calls, no manipulative messages, no family emergencies demanding my attention. Nothing. At work, things changed quietly. My manager called me into her office and closed the door. "I want to be clear," she said. "The investigation found no wrongdoing on your part. In fact, your documentation and cooperation were exceptional." I nodded, waiting for the other shoe. "We're reinstating your promotion," she continued, retroactively. I felt the words land, but they didn't spark joy the way I once imagined they would. Instead, there was a strange sadness attached to them. This mattered so much to the version of me who believed success would finally make my family see me. That version no longer existed. I thanked her and returned to my desk where congratulatory emails trickled in. Polite, professional, carefully worded. People respected me now. But respect earned through survival feels different than respect earned through belonging. The second week, Mark asked to meet. We sat across from each other in a coffee shop we used to love. He looked tired, older. "I handled things badly," he said. "I should have trusted you." "Yes," I replied. He flinched at my tone. "I was scared," he continued. "Your family, the investigation, all of it. I didn't know where I fit." I studied his face, searching for the man I once planned to marry. "I needed a partner," I said, "not a spectator." He nodded slowly. "I don't think I'm that person," he admitted. There was no drama in the end, no raised voices, just an understanding that the version of love we had imagined was built on stability I was never actually allowed to have. We parted kindly. That surprised me most of all. The third week, my mother sent a letter. Not a message, not a voicemail. A letter. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Tight, careful, controlled. She wrote about regret, about fear, about how motherhood hadn't come with instructions, and how she had made choices she thought were necessary at the time. She did not ask for forgiveness. She asked for understanding. I read it twice, then placed it in a drawer. Understanding did not require reconciliation. The fourth week, something inside me finally shifted. It happened on an ordinary evening. I was alone in my apartment eating dinner in silence when I realized I was no longer rehearsing conversations in my head. I wasn't anticipating accusations. I wasn't strategizing defenses. My mind was quiet. And in that quiet, a question surfaced that I had never allowed myself to ask before. What do I want? Not what would prove them wrong. Not what would earn approval. Not what would keep the peace. What did I actually want? The answer didn't arrive fully formed. It came in fragments. Space, autonomy, a life where my value wasn't measured against someone else's fragility. I started small. I took a week off work, not to recover, to explore. I drove north, away from the city, without a plan. I stayed in a small lakeside town where no one knew my last name or my history. I walked in the mornings, read in the afternoons, slept without alarms. On the third day, I realized something startling. I liked my own company. That was new. I had spent so long being useful to others that I had never learned who I was without an audience. I began to write again, not reports, not timelines, thoughts, memories, questions. I wrote about childhood dinners where my voice disappeared under Evan's, about the way my parents' praise always came with conditions, about how I learned to excel quietly because loud success provoked resentment. I also wrote about resilience, about adaptability, about the strange strength that grows when you are never rescued. For the first time, I didn't frame these traits as compensation. They were simply mine. When I returned to work, Dana invited me to lunch. "You're different," she observed. "I feel different," I replied. She smiled. "Most people come out of something like this wanting to disappear or dominate. You seem grounded." "I'm done auditioning," I said. She nodded. "Good, because there's something else." She told me that my case had become a reference point internally, that compliance teams were using it as an example of how retaliation hides behind family dynamics, that other employees had quietly reached out, sharing similar experiences. "They see themselves in you," she said. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the people who had stayed silent because speaking up felt like betrayal, about how family loyalty is often used as a weapon against the one who refuses to lie. A seed planted itself in my mind. Not revenge, purpose. In the following days, I began to imagine a future not defined by reaction, but by intention. I didn't want to be a cautionary tale whispered in hallways. I wanted to be a door. The final piece came unexpectedly. A call from the regulatory office. The lead investigator thanked me for my cooperation. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You handled this with integrity," he said. "You didn't just defend yourself, you exposed a system." After the call ended, I stood by my window watching the city move below me. For the first time, I understood that surviving was not the same as living. And living required choice. In the next chapter, I will make one. A decision that has nothing to do with my family, my brother, or the damage they caused. A decision that finally belongs to me alone. The decision didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. There was no lightning bolt, no sudden clarity. It came quietly, the way most honest things do on a Tuesday evening, while I was standing in line at the grocery store listening to a woman in front of me apologize to the cashier for holding up the line. She kept saying she was sorry, for fumbling with her wallet, for existing too slowly. Something in my chest tightened. I recognized that voice. I had used it for most of my life. That night, I pulled out the notebook I had been filling during my time away and reread everything I'd written. Not as evidence, not as preparation, as truth. A pattern emerged that had nothing to do with Evan or my parents directly, but everything to do with systems that reward silence and punish resistance. Families, workplaces, institutions that call themselves protective while quietly deciding who is expendable. I realized then that what unsettled me most about everything that had happened was not the betrayal itself. It was how common it was. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my company's ethics committee. Not to complain, to propose something. They listened politely, at first skeptical. I explained that retaliation cases rooted in family or personal relationships often went undetected because they didn't look like traditional corporate risk. They looked like drama, like personality conflict. But the damage is the same, I said. Careers derailed, people silenced. I suggested a pilot program. Confidential advisory support for employees navigating ethical conflicts involving relatives, partners, or personal ties. Not counseling, not compliance. A bridge. They asked for time to consider. I gave it to them. In the meantime, my life continued to recalibrate. I moved out of my apartment and into a smaller place closer to the lake. Less impressive, more peaceful. I sold things I had accumulated to prove something to someone who never cared. I stopped answering my mother's monthly messages, not out of anger, out of clarity. I was no longer available for emotional negotiations. Then came the call that surprised me. From Evan. He was calling from a restricted number. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Claire," he said, his voice flat, stripped of bravado. "I don't expect you to help me." I said nothing. "I just wanted you to know," he continued. "They took the deal off the table. I might be looking at real time." My grip tightened on the phone. "And I asked?" He laughed softly. "You always did that. Wait for people to finish." I closed my eyes. "I was wrong," he said, "about you." I let the silence stretch. "I thought if I stayed ahead of you, I'd be safe," he said. "I didn't realize I was running from myself." I thought of the boy who had always been rescued before he had a chance to fall. "This isn't a conversation about forgiveness," I said, "and it's not about absolution." "I know," he replied. "I just wanted you to hear it." When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, closure. Later that week, the ethics committee approved the pilot program. Quietly. They asked me to help design it. I agreed on one condition. "It can't carry my name," I said. "This isn't about recognition." They accepted. Word traveled anyway. People started reaching out. Colleagues, friends of friends, women in their 30s, 50s, 60s. People who had spent decades minimizing their own experiences to keep peace. One woman told me she had covered for her brother's financial misconduct for 15 years because her mother begged her to. Another said she had lost 3 promotions because her husband worked in the same industry and complained she was too ambitious. Listening to them, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. My story was not unique. That made it less special. And more important, the pilot program launched quietly 6 months later. By then, my life barely resembled the one I had fought so hard to protect. I had stepped down from a high-visibility leadership track and moved into a role that allowed me to mentor, build, and influence without being constantly on display. Some people called it a step back. It felt like a step into myself. One evening, as I was reviewing program feedback, Dana called. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said. "The regulatory case is closing." "And Evan?" I asked. "Convicted," she replied, "reduced sentence, no appeals." I thanked her and hung up. I expected to feel finality. What I felt was release. That night, I walked down to the lake. The water was still, the air cool. I thought about the woman in the grocery store line, about the employees who had reached out, about the younger version of myself who believed survival was the same as success. I realized then that revenge had never been my true motive. Restoration was, not of relationships, of self. In the next chapter, the past will return one final time, not to threaten, but to test whether I truly believe the life I am building is enough. Because healing is not proven when things go well. It is proven when old wounds knock and you choose not to reopen them. The past didn't return with anger. It returned with nostalgia. That was what made it dangerous. It began with a Thanksgiving invitation. A real one. Printed, cream-colored paper. My mother's handwriting on the envelope softer than I remembered. Dinner at 6. Just family. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, the message was careful, polite, almost warm. She wrote that this year had been hard for everyone, that she understood I needed space, that she hoped just once we could sit at the same table again. No mention of Evan, no apology, no accountability, just an appeal to memory. Thanksgiving had always been complicated in my family, a performance of unity, a meal heavy with unspoken rules. I was expected to help in the kitchen, smile politely, and make myself useful without being visible. And yet, there were fragments I missed. The smell of roasted turkey, the quiet of early evening, the idea of belonging, even if it had always been conditional. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I brought the invitation to my therapist. She held it thoughtfully, then looked at me. "What do you want from going?" she asked. I considered it honestly. "I want to know if I can sit at that table without disappearing," I said. She nodded. "And if you can't, then I'll leave," I replied. That was new. I RSVP'd yes. The house looked the same when I arrived. The familiar curve of the driveway, the porch light that flickered, the doorbell that stuck for half a second before ringing. My mother opened the door. She smiled tentative, like someone approaching a wild animal. "You look well," she said. "So do you," I replied. Inside, the air smelled like sage and cinnamon. My father was not there. He had moved into a small apartment near his brother, my mother told me quietly. They were separated now. Not divorced. Separated. Evan was not mentioned. Dinner unfolded slowly. My mother talked about neighbors, about recipes, about the weather. She did not ask about work. She did not ask about my life. For the first time, I noticed the absence of intrusion as much as I had once noticed neglect. Halfway through the meal, she finally looked at me directly. "I miss you," she said. I set my fork down. "I know," I replied. She waited. "I also miss the daughter I might have had if I'd been allowed to exist fully in this house," I continued. "That grief matters too." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I thought if I kept things balanced, I could hold the family together." "You didn't balance anything," I said gently. "You tilted everything." She nodded, tears spilling now. "I don't know how to fix it." I took a breath. "You don't," I said. "You accept what is." She reached across the table, stopping just short of my hand. "I want to be part of your life," she said. I met her gaze. "Then you have to meet me where I am," I replied. "Not where you wish I'd stayed." We finished dinner quietly. There was no confrontation, no grand resolution, just honesty. When I left, she hugged me. Not tightly. Respectfully. On the drive home, I felt neither relief nor regret. Just clarity. The following week, something else arrived from the past. A letter from Evan, handwritten, postmarked from a correctional facility. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside, his writing was uneven. He wrote about routine, about time, about the strange relief of structure after chaos. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for money. He asked one question. "Do you ever think about who we could have been?" I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I did not answer. Some questions are not meant to be revisited. Others had started asking me questions too. Women in the pilot program wanted to know how to rebuild trust, how to set boundaries without burning bridges, how to live without the constant need to justify themselves. I didn't give them instructions. I told them stories about leaving a dinner table without guilt, about declining invitations without explanations, about choosing peace even when it looks like distance. As winter deepened, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure. Alignment. My life no longer felt like a reaction to someone else's choices. It felt intentional. Then one afternoon, Dana called with a final update. "Your father wants to transfer something to you," she said. "An account." Quietly. I closed my eyes. "What kind of account?" I asked. "A trust," she replied. "Set aside years ago. He says it was always meant for you." The old reflex stirred. Suspicion, obligation, guilt. "I don't want it," I said. Dana paused. "You don't even want to know what it is?" "No," I replied, "because if it comes with history, it comes with strings." She was silent for a moment. "I'll tell him," she said. That night, I sat by the lake again, watching the water freeze slowly at the edges. I thought about the trust, about money, about how often love is replaced with resources when emotions fail. I felt no bitterness, just resolve. In the next chapter, I will make a final choice about legacy, not what I inherit, but what I leave behind, and who gets to define it. Legacy used to be a word that made me uncomfortable. It sounded heavy, pretentious, like something reserved for people with estates and portraits and names carved into buildings. For most of my life, I was just trying to survive the present. The future felt like an abstract concept I wasn't allowed to plan for. That changed the day I declined my father's trust. Not because it was brave, because it was honest. When Dana confirmed the paperwork had been withdrawn, I expected backlash, guilt, pressure, a lecture about family duty. None of that came. What came instead was silence. And in that silence, I finally understood something fundamental. My family's power over me had never come from money or authority. It had come from my willingness to stay entangled. Without that, there was nothing left to negotiate. The foundation work began to take more of my time after that. What started as a quiet pilot expanded faster than anyone predicted. Human resources departments from other companies reached out. Legal teams asked for frameworks. Women who had spent decades swallowing injustice found language for it for the first time. One afternoon, I received an email from a woman named Patricia. She was 62, a grandmother, a senior project coordinator at a logistics firm. She wrote that she had been passed over for promotion 4 times because her son worked in the same division, and complained she was too intimidating. Management framed it as conflict avoidance. After one conversation through the advisory program, she filed a formal complaint with documentation she had kept quietly for years. She got the promotion, but that wasn't why she wrote. She wrote to say thank you for showing her that she didn't have to protect people who were hurting her just because they shared blood. I read her email twice, then I cried, not because it was sad, because it was proof. Proof that pain doesn't disappear when ignored. It multiplies, quietly, across generations. But so does courage. Around the same time, my company offered me another promotion, a bigger one. More visibility, more money, more influence. It was everything I had once worked toward. I turned it down. My manager looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "I'm building something else." She nodded. "I thought you might say that." I stayed, but on my terms. Reduced hours, clear boundaries, no after-hours emergencies, no emotional labor disguised as leadership. Some people didn't understand. I didn't need them to. As winter faded into spring, my mother reached out again. This time not with an invitation, with a question. "Can we start over?" she asked. I sat with that message for a long time. Start over implied erasing. I wasn't interested in that. I replied honestly. "We can start differently," I wrote, "but only if we acknowledge what came before." She didn't respond for several days. Then she sent a simple message. "I understand." It wasn't an apology, but it was the first time she hadn't tried to rewrite the past. We began meeting for coffee once a month. Neutral spaces, clear time limits, no family updates, no gossip. Sometimes we talked about books, sometimes the weather, sometimes nothing at all. It was not closeness, it was respect, and for me that was enough. Evan wrote once more, a shorter letter this time. He said he had started attending group sessions, that he was beginning to understand how fear had shaped him, that he didn't expect reconciliation. He ended with one sentence, "I hope you keep choosing yourself." I didn't reply, but I believed him. The final decision about legacy came unexpectedly. The board overseeing the advisory program asked me to formally separate it from my employer, to establish it as an independent nonprofit. They wanted me to lead it. I took a long walk by the lake before answering. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed worth was something granted by others, the one who thought endurance was the same as strength. I thought about all the people who would never get closure, never get apologies, never get justice in neat, satisfying ways, and I thought about what I could offer them. Not revenge, not validation, language, permission, support. I accepted. We filed the paperwork that summer. I named it quietly, carefully. Not after myself, not after my family. I named it for what it offered. Clear ground. Because that was what I had built for myself, and what I wanted others to stand on. The launch was small, no press, no speeches. Just a room full of people who had learned the hard way that silence protects the wrong things. As I looked around that room, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Pride. Not the loud kind. The grounded kind. The kind that comes from alignment. In the final chapter, I will tell you what I know now after everything. Not as advice, as truth. Because if there is one thing my story proves, it is this. You don't need to destroy anyone to reclaim your life. You just need to stop sacrificing yourself to keep others comfortable. There is a moment that comes after everything falls apart and begins again. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. For me, it arrived on an ordinary Sunday morning, nearly a year after the investigation closed, while I was standing in my kitchen washing a mug I had already cleaned once. Sunlight slanted across the counter. The lake outside my window was still. Nothing demanded my attention. And for the first time, nothing felt unfinished. That realization unsettled me more than any crisis ever had. For most of my life, urgency had been my companion. Something always needed fixing. Someone always needed managing. Some version of myself always needed improvement to earn safety. When that constant forward lean disappeared, I had to learn how to stand still. I had to learn who I was without a problem to solve. Clear ground was growing steadily by then. Not explosively, intentionally. We supported people navigating retaliation tied to family dynamics, workplace favoritism, inherited power. The stories were different, but the emotional patterns were strikingly similar. The overlooked daughter, the scapegoated sibling, the employee punished for refusing to protect someone else's image. I listened more than I spoke. When people asked how I survived what I went through, I never framed it as strength. I stopped participating, I told them. That confused some of them. What do you mean, they asked. I stopped negotiating my worth, I said. I stopped explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. That idea frightened people, especially women my age and older. We had been taught that endurance was virtue, that loyalty required silence, that walking away was failure. Unlearning that took time. I was still unlearning it myself. My relationship with my mother remained measured. We spoke monthly, sometimes less, sometimes more. She did not ask about Evan. I did not offer updates. That silence felt like mutual consent rather than avoidance. One afternoon after coffee, she said something unexpected. I used to think love meant keeping everyone together, she said quietly. Now I see that I was just afraid to let anything change. I looked at her, really looked at her, and understood for the first time that fear had been the family language long before I was born. I forgive you, I said. Her breath caught. Not because it didn't matter, I added, but because I don't want to carry it anymore. She nodded, tears in her eyes. We did not hug. That too was progress. My father did not reach out again. I heard through Dana that his health had declined, that he had moved closer to extended family, that he spoke of me rarely and always carefully. I wished him no harm. I also felt no obligation. That balance surprised me. I had always believed forgiveness required reconciliation, that healing meant restoring what was broken. Now I understood that healing sometimes means accepting that something ended exactly when it was supposed to. Evan remained a distant presence, a name on paperwork, a memory that no longer spiked my pulse. I thought about him occasionally, usually when mentoring someone who reminded me of the younger version of him, the one who had learned early that being protected felt safer than being accountable. I hoped he was learning something different now, but hope was no longer a tether. My life settled into a rhythm that felt almost gentle. Mornings by the lake, work that mattered without consuming me, conversations that didn't require armor, friendships chosen rather than inherited. One evening, I hosted a small dinner, just friends, no occasion, no performance. As I watched people laugh around my table, I realized something that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I had built the family I needed, not out of obligation, out of alignment. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone with a glass of water listening to the quiet. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who measured herself by how little trouble she caused, the one who thought fairness was something you earned by being agreeable enough. I wished I could tell her one thing. You don't need permission to take up space. You don't need a villain to justify leaving. You don't need revenge to prove you were wronged. What you need is truth, and the courage to live by it even when it cost you familiar love. As Clear Ground continued to grow, journalists occasionally reached out. They wanted a story, a narrative, a clean arc. I declined most requests. This was not a redemption tale. It was a reclamation. The world loves stories where justice is loud and villains fall spectacularly, but most real justice is quiet. Most healing looks boring from the outside, and that is its power. The final test came unexpectedly, as these things often do. An invitation arrived in my inbox from a professional conference. They wanted me to speak, to share my experience, to inspire. I read the email twice. Once this would have thrilled me. Recognition, validation, proof. I thought about it carefully. Then I declined. Not because I was afraid, because my work didn't require a stage. It required consistency. That night I slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsals, no arguments in my head. Just rest. In the final chapter, I will tell you what peace actually looks like after betrayal. Not the version sold in quotes or victories. The real one. The one you build slowly when no one is watching. The one that lasts. Peace does not arrive with fireworks. It does not announce itself or demand recognition. It settles in quietly like a deep breath you didn't realize you had been holding for decades. For me, peace showed up on a morning that looked exactly like every other morning. I woke up before the alarm. The lake outside my window was calm, the water barely moving. I made coffee and stood barefoot on the kitchen floor, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ordinary sounds of a life that no longer felt like it was bracing for impact. Nothing was missing. That was how I knew. For most of my life, happiness had felt conditional, temporary, something that might be revoked the moment I disappointed someone or stepped out of line. Even my victories had carried anxiety. How long would this last? Who would I upset by succeeding? Now there was none of that. Just steadiness. Clear Ground had been operating independently for almost a year. We never advertised aggressively. People found us because someone they trusted whispered, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." That was enough. I spent my days listening to stories that echoed my own in different voices and different decades. Women who had spent 50 years shrinking themselves so their siblings could shine. Men who had taken the fall for family businesses that ran on silence. People who had been told loyalty meant enduring harm. I never told them what to do. I told them what I had learned. That boundaries are not punishments. That walking away is not abandonment. That choosing yourself is not betrayal. One afternoon, a woman in her late 50s sat across from me, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "if I stop fixing everything, there will be nothing left." I looked at her and saw my mother. I saw myself. "There will be something left," I said gently. "It will just be different, quieter, and real." That night, I drove home slowly, watching the sunset over the water. I thought about how many people confuse chaos with connection. How drama can masquerade as love when it's all you've ever known. I thought about Evan, not with anger, with clarity. I finally understood that his greatest fear had never been failure. It had been irrelevance. He had learned early that attention came from crisis, from being needed, from being protected. When that stopped working, he panicked. That was not my responsibility to fix. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for that truth. My mother and I maintained our careful distance. Sometimes she asked about my work. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. We no longer pretended to be closer than we were. That honesty felt like respect. Once she asked if I ever regretted not fighting harder for the family to stay together. I considered the question carefully before answering. "No," I said, "because staying together should never require someone to disappear." She nodded slowly. We both understood what that meant. My father sent one final message through Dana. A short note. No requests, no explanations. "I am proud of you." I read it once. Then I deleted it. Not out of spite. Out of completion. I didn't need it anymore. The last piece of my transformation came when I stopped framing my life as an aftermath. I was no longer the woman who survived betrayal or the sister who exposed a scandal. Those stories were true, but they were not the whole truth. I was a woman who built something meaningful out of honesty. I was a woman who chose peace over performance. I was a woman who stopped waiting for the wrong people to see her value. On the anniversary of the day Evan tried to ruin me, I did nothing special. No reflection, no ritual. I planted new flowers by the lake. As I pressed my hands into the soil, I realized something simple and profound. Revenge had never been the point. The real victory was this life, a life where I wake up without fear, where my success doesn't require anyone else's failure, where love is chosen, not negotiated, where silence feels restful, not threatening. If you are listening to this story and you recognize yourself in it, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not difficult for wanting fairness. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not broken because your family could not love you well. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you must protect yourself from. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop explaining and start living. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of moments you've lived through or choices you're still struggling to make, I invite you to stay here. Subscribe to this channel. Share your story in the comments if you feel safe doing so. Your voice matters, and your life does not need to be loud to be powerful. Mine isn't. It's just finally my own.